Yes, it's me, the masked wrestling fan, with your wrestling memory. Summer of 1985, I was brought by my mother, the masked wrestling fan's mother, to a state fair, an exposition. It was in Rhode Island, of all places, and the matches were sponsored by Killer Kowalski's wrestling school. Now, as a young wrestling fan, I had heard of Killer Kowalski, not really familiar with his wrestling work. And these were his students. His student wrestlers were wrestling in front of us at this 4-H fair, this big 4-H fair. Summer of 1986, 1987, and 1988 that I went to 3 consecutive shows over 3 consecutive summers. Now, the first year, 1986, I recall that my mother and I sat in the bleachers, which was a little far from the ring, and we could hear a man mocking the wrestling. It was a smart mark, an early rendition of a smart mark, who was mocking the wrestlers. I don't recall very much of the entire show, except the Pink Assassin, a masked pink wrestler, wrestled on the show. And most significantly, the main event, I believe, was Misty Blue Sims and a female wrestler of her tag team ship who would go on to be around for a while. Heidi Lee Morgan, I believe, and Misty Blue Sims wrestled Linda Dallas and a larger female Russian wrestler, Olga, I believe, Comrade Olga. And this was a big hot main event, summer of 1986, I believe, and Misty Blue Sims was quite the treat. This wrestling fan, must have been middle-aged at the time, was mocking the entire wrestling show and really annoying the shit out of me, even though I was a young fellow. Now, it was quite interesting to see this wrestling from a distance. It was kind of a baseball stadium type of environment. Hard to explain. It was outdoors. And I remember it was drizzling a little bit, like water, rain. The next year came, 1987, and I sat a little bit closer. Had a better view. We sat on the ground near the ring, and that cost $1. So you see this wrestling for free with your paid ticket to the wrestling to the 4-H fair, the Rocky Hill State Fair and Expo. Paid an extra $1, you're getting me closer to the ring. First year we should have paid the damn $1, but we didn't. Second year we paid the $1. And I don't really remember much about that second show, the second year of 1987, except that the Pink Assassin did in fact wrestle again. And there was a guy, a wrestler, who wrestled. He kind of looked like an Al Perez type, like a good-looking guy. I don't think it was Joe Savoldi. I don't think that was him. I don't think he worked for Kowalski very much, but it was another guy who looked like he could have been a WWF guy, is what I was thinking. Big guy, nice guy, young guy, dark skin, Latino or something. And I shook his hand and I talked to him for several minutes as a young fan about wrestling, and he was quite nice to me. I don't recall the main event. Wait a minute. I think I do now. I do remember the main event for one of the years. It might have been for the previous year. It might have been, I don't even know. Cowboy Chris Duffy versus Bill Walsh. Now, this Bill Walsh was, we call him the missing Von Erich because he looked like he could have been a Chris Von Erich or a Mike Von Erich. He didn't look, or a David. He didn't look like one of the healthy Von Erichs like Kevin or Kerry, but he kind of looked like a weak missing Von Erich is what we'd call him. Bill Walsh. And if you were in New England around that time, you would know who I'm talking about. He wrestled Chris Duffy every show for about 15 years on these Kowalski shows. I think Chris Duffy eventually got up to be a couple of preliminary matches, jobber scenarios. No offense to him or to jobbers, but he would wrestle Triple H and people like that. Chris Duffy, you probably saw him on WWF television around 1995. But Cowboy Chris Duffy in this venue was a main event guy. And I believe Flying Brian Bill Walsh, whatever his name is, beat him and pinned him. That was either the first year or the second year. I think it was the second year. Now, the third year, my mother, the mass wrestling fan's mother, could not attend. She had her friend bring me to this wrestling match. A guy, just a regular type of guy, kind of a Cliff Clavin type, and nice guy. Brought me to the wrestling show and didn't really talk to this guy very much, but I sat and watched the wrestling. It was 1988, and I remember, uh, if I have these years right, 86, 87, 88. For the final year, we sat very close. I can't remember the damn matches, but I do recall that at this show, the buzz around the crowd was several things. One, that Bruiser Brody had been killed. Two, Adrian Adonis had died in a car accident. And three, Dick Murdoch had rejoined Dusty Rhodes, and the Sheik had turned on Dusty Rhodes in a cage match. Now, there was no internet. There was no Pro Wrestling Illustrated weekly magazine or any such thing, no hotline. It was literally a buzz, and I just can't explain it to you, wrestling fans these days that have all this information at the tip of your fingertips. But back then, we would literally just know things because fans would tell us. Other fans, somehow you'd find out this shit, this information, and I don't know how you'd do it, but I can't remember how you'd find these things out. But there was just a little buzz amongst the wrestling fans, and I remember that buzz of the Dick Murdoch situation, turning babyface and so forth. And although I did not know the term babyface, I just knew good guy or bad guy or friend or whatever. And the whole thing with the Sheik, it was very confusing to me that why was the Sheik even in the NWA? Why did they have him in this match? But the whole thing with Brody and Adonis, I just remember sitting there, this outdoor baseball field, and I think maybe somebody told me somehow, but just didn't really quite, didn't have anyone to talk to about it. Brought some wrestling magazines with me to the show. Had a good time. I don't really recall any of the damn matches, although I think Pink Assassin wrestled again. And so when fans reminisce about wrestling, sometimes we think about the big matches we saw. We saw this big wrestling match, this Sting Hulk Hogan match. I saw this barely legal ECW pay-per-view, and sometimes you forget about these little shows. And I don't know if Triple H was in those audiences as well, watching these matches and thinking, hey, man, I'd like to be a wrestler myself someday. But sometimes you don't think about those things. And as a wrestling fan, these little corridors of your mind, they come back to you and you say, I had been to this show. I had seen this thing, this outdoor 4-H fair. So my mom, to her credit, always made sure I got to see these shows. And to the wrestlers' credit, I'm sure they didn't get paid too much money. Or maybe they did. Maybe they got to eat some of the pigs in the 4-H show, but it was always a good time. So I guess when we're coming up on these things now, these modern day current events and these outdoor shows and in Saudi Arabia and these foreign countries and politics notwithstanding and the whole thing with the women wrestlers not being able to compete and wrestle, and sometimes I think they ought to just be washing the male wrestlers' trunks and staying at home and having babies. But sometimes I think they should be wrestling and putting on a good example for the young ladies out there, okay? So I have mixed feelings about these things. But for these young people watching this wrestling and thinking, well, we're high and mighty, we have all our Western values, and we let our women vote, and we let them drive the vehicles and, pick up the children from school and so forth. Please remember that for some of these poor, hungry wrestling fans over there, these poor, miserable people in Saudi Arabia, to see this wrestling excitement, to see this action, it's just such a wonderful thing. So who are we to deny them? I mean, they might behead a fan or two, but it's really okay. I don't want to get down the whole political thing. You got me very upset now. But just to say that I remember these wrestling matches, I remember these things, and I just want to share these memories. The Mass Wrestling Fan wants to share the memories with you. So I just want to say thank you for watching The Mass Wrestling Fan. I'll have plenty of more videos, and we'll be watching the wrestling. Thank you.